Her grandson threw soda in her face. So she shut down his future and opened the door for 1,000 other kids. He called it betrayal. She called it character. Then he sued her for emotional damage and lost. Now the internet's divided, the courts have spoken, and America's watching a grandmother rewrite the rules of family loyalty, one denied apology at a time. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The waitress had refilled my water glass 3 times before Brandon finally walked in. I'd picked booth 6 on purpose, back corner, best light, facing the door. I'd worn my navy slacks, a cream blouse with mother-of-pearl buttons, and even applied a little blush, the kind that says, "I'm still here. I still try." When I saw him saunter in, phone in hand, AirPods still in, oversized hoodie draped like armor over a body I'd once carried in my arms, I felt a bloom of relief. And then, almost immediately, regret. He didn't even glance up as he slid into the booth across from me. "Took you long enough," I said gently, smoothing the napkin on my lap. "Your text said noon." "It's 12:19, he mumbled, eyes on his screen. "Relax." I tried. I really did. "So, how's school?" I asked, keeping my voice bright. "You getting used to the city?" He exhaled, loudly. "It's New York, Grandma. I'm not getting used to it. I'm owning it." The waitress approached. Young, polite, eyes darting toward Brandon with caution. He ordered a strawberry soda and fries without looking at her. I requested a garden salad, dressing on the side. The moment she left, he leaned back and smirked. "You know, most of the kids at NYU don't even talk to their grandparents." "Is that so?" I smiled. "Well, I'm glad you're not most kids." He rolled his eyes so hard I half expected them to stay fixed in his skull. "Okay, whatever. I came because Mom said you'd probably guilt-trip me if I didn't." That stung. I folded my hands, knotted them quietly beneath the table. "I just wanted to catch up, that's all," I said. "It's been a while." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw none of the boy I raised on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and bedtime stories, just posture and attitude and something sour behind his smirk. "Catch up on what?" he said. "Your crossword puzzles? Your cats?" I blinked. "You know," I said carefully, "being young doesn't excuse cruelty. You can be smart and kind." He laughed, loud enough that the waitress flinched slightly as she approached with our drinks. "You're always lecturing," he said, taking the soda, eyes gleaming with mockery. "Always trying to teach people how to be like you. No offense, Grandma, but your time's up. This isn't your world anymore." He lifted the glass. I thought he was going to sip. Instead, with one flick of his wrist, calculated, careless, it arced forward. The strawberry soda struck my blouse dead center, splattering pink across my chest and soaking into the folds of my blouse like it had always belonged there. Cold, syrupy, humiliating. Gasps fluttered from a nearby table. A man in a baseball cap looked away. The waitress stood frozen, napkin in hand, unsure whether to help or disappear. Brandon grinned, then leaned forward and whispered like it was a joke, "You're just a crazy old lady. Seriously, get over yourself." He stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and sauntered out like he'd dropped the mic. The door chimed behind him. I sat motionless, soaked and still. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles bone white. The waitress stepped forward slowly, her eyes wide. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It's not your fault," I said, voice low and steady. He made his choice. She laid the check gently on the table. He didn't pay. Of course he hadn't. I pulled a 20 from my wallet and set it down, careful not to drip soda on the bills. Outside, the day was bright and unbothered. A mother wrangled twins into a booster seat. A man laughed into a Bluetooth headset. Life moved on. But I didn't. Not yet. I looked down at the stain on my blouse, then at the half-empty glass he'd left behind. He thinks I'm powerless, I thought. But power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes it signs a check with someone else's name on it. The blouse was still damp when I hung it on the laundry room door, pink blotches staining the cream fabric like old bruises. I didn't scrub it. I wanted to see it for a while longer, to remember. I made tea instead, chamomile with a touch of honey, and sat down at the oak desk my husband built years ago, back when forever still meant something. The envelope was already there, cream-colored, thick, labeled simply, Brandon, College Fund Documents. I opened it. The total was $174,218.41, accumulated slowly over 18 years. Birthday deposits, tax refunds, tutoring side gigs, and substitute principal paychecks. Every single dollar had been planted with intention, like the perennials in the garden he used to help me water. In the corner of the envelope were crayon drawings, old, faded. A stick figure me, holding a watering can. A smaller figure beside me, labeled Brandon. His little handwriting spelled it wrong every time. I never corrected him. I used to think it was charming. Back then, he'd follow me around the yard, chubby legs racing to keep up. He'd ask 1,000 questions. Why do tomatoes need cages? Do worms have birthdays? What if flowers could talk? I told him they did. And he believed me. I stared at those drawings now, as if they belonged to a stranger's story. I replayed the diner moment again in my mind. His laugh, the ice-cold syrup against my chest, the way he said, "Crazy old lady," like it was a punchline and a eulogy rolled into one. I closed my eyes, breathed. Then I picked up the phone. "Eileen Hargrave's office," the voice chirped on the third ring. Her assistant, still chipper after all these years. "This is Margaret Ellison," I said. "I'd like to schedule a call with Eileen. It's about Brandon's college fund." There was a pause, then a soft, "Of course, Mrs. Ellison. Let me see when she's free." 10 minutes later, I had my answer. I was sole trustee, no cosigner, no legal obligation, no binding transfer. "Technically," Eileen said, "you could buy a boat with it if you wanted to." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was horrifying how much I'd assumed I owed him, that the love I poured in those accounts had matured into a debt, not a gift. After we hung up, I went upstairs, dug through the hope chest in the guest room, his old room, once painted seafoam green with spaceship decals on the wall. Inside were old school projects, photos, and the letters. Dozens of them. "Dear Grandma," one read, written in purple marker with a backwards G. "Thank you for letting me plant the sunflower. I hope it is big like your heart." Another, "I love when we make pancakes. Mommy burns them. Yours are soft." And this one, folded neatly, taped shut. "If you die, I will bury you in the garden so the flowers will remember you." I held that one the longest. Something broke open in me then. Not grief, not rage. Something colder, like truth sharpening itself into decision. I went back downstairs and opened my laptop, typed in the name I'd circled months ago but never contacted. Valerie Eames, Director, Carolina Hope Foundation. I remembered her from the local news, a woman who fought for youth programs, senior care partnerships, intergenerational mentorship. She reminded me of who I used to be before I started getting called outdated. She answered on the second ring. "This is Valerie." "Ms. Eames," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Margaret Ellison. I'd like to talk to you about redirecting a college fund." There was a pause, then a quiet but intrigued, "You have my full attention." I looked at the drawing again. Brandon, holding my hand, both of us smiling under a crooked sun. "I want to create something," I said, "something that doesn't reward entitlement. Something that uplifts respect." Another pause. Then, "Let's set a meeting." I ended the call, closed the laptop, and this time, when I looked at that stained blouse in the laundry room, I smiled. Not because I forgave him, but because he had just funded a legacy that would never carry his name. The Carolina Hope Foundation was tucked between a bakery and an old record store, the kind of brick-fronted buildings that had watched the town age but never tried to stop it. I parked in the shade of a dogwood tree and sat with the engine off for a minute longer than I needed to. Not nervous, just ready. Inside, the waiting area smelled faintly of printer toner and lemon polish. The receptionist offered me water. I declined. Valerie Eames greeted me herself, blazer over a linen blouse, silver curls pulled into a low bun, eyes sharp behind vintage cat-eye frames. She extended her hand. "Mrs. Ellison, I've been looking forward to this." We settled in her glass-walled office, windows overlooking a community garden out back. Children's laughter drifted in through the cracked window panes. I took that as a good omen. "I'd like to start a scholarship," I said, laying out the binder I'd prepared. "Not based on GPA or athleticism, based on character. Specifically how young people show respect and care for the elders in their lives." Valerie blinked, lips parting just slightly. "I can't say I've ever heard that criteria before." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "Most systems reward performance, not values." She leaned back slowly, fingers steepled. "Go on." I explained the framework I envisioned, an application process with essays, interviews, letters from senior mentors. I talked about how it would serve teens in lower income brackets who demonstrated intergenerational compassion, not for praise, but because it was who they were. Quiet, everyday acts, bringing groceries, listening without impatience, visiting a grandparent, regularly, defending an elder's dignity in a public space. I didn't mention Brandon. I didn't need to. When I finished, Valerie was quiet for a beat. Then she smiled, not politely but deeply. "You're not building a scholarship, you're building a mirror." "A mirror?" "For a generation that's forgotten where they came from." I think it's brilliant. We met again a week later, this time with the Foundation's board. I was the oldest woman at the table, but not the quietest. I spoke plainly, about erosion, about entitlement, about how values don't get passed down like heirlooms. You have to plant them, water them, watch them take root. There were questions, of course, a few raised eyebrows. One board member asked, "What if it's seen as judgmental?" Some kids don't have great relationships with their elders. "I'm not looking to reward blind obedience," I said. "I'm looking to uplift those who treat others, especially the forgotten, with care, even when it's not easy." The vote passed unanimously. We called it the Ellison Foundation. I chose the name deliberately. Not for Brandon, not for legacy, for me. For the years I gave to my students, to my family, to a world that now called me outdated because I valued manners over metrics. The launch was quiet. No ribbon cutting, no press release, just an online form and a mission statement. Respect is a seed. We fund those who tend it well. Valerie set up the interviews. I conducted the first 5 myself. One applicant was a girl who walked her elderly neighbor's dog twice a day after school, rain or shine, because his legs are stiff, but his stories are gold. Another had been helping his great-aunt, who has dementia, write letters she never mails just so she can feel remembered. They reminded me of Brandon. Or rather, the Brandon I used to know. The boy who once cried because he thought pulling a worm from the dirt had messed up its house. That boy hadn't vanished. He'd just grown into someone else. Still, the ache eased. The day I liquidated the account, I didn't flinch. The bank teller asked, "Transferring the full amount?" "Yes," I said. She nodded, unaware that she was witnessing the cleanest revenge story never told. By sunset, the funds were seeded into the Foundation's account. Valerie texted a single line. "It's official. You've planted something powerful." I stood in my backyard as the sky turned purple, the wind carrying the smell of basil and tomato vines. Somewhere, a wind chime clattered lazily. In my hand, I held the final receipt, and for the first time since that diner booth, I felt clean. The knock on the door was louder than necessary, sharp, demanding. I already knew it was Brandon. I'd left the porch light off on purpose. I opened the door slowly. He stood there in a fleece jacket, jaw tight, hands shoved into the pockets like he needed to hold something back. Behind him, his rental car idled, still running, like he didn't plan to stay long. "Come in," I said evenly. He stepped past me without a word, tracking dampness onto the hardwood. No hug, no eye contact. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. Same spot where he'd once slurped cocoa with whipped cream and asked if Santa liked cinnamon. Now, his sneakers tapped impatiently under the table, arms crossed like a defense mechanism. "I need the transfer," he said flatly. "I figured that's why you came." He exhaled, annoyed. "NYU's billing department needs confirmation by next week. I tried calling the bank and they said the fund doesn't exist anymore." "It doesn't," I said. "What does that mean?" I looked him in the eye. "I repurposed it." He stared at me, confusion morphing into something uglier. "You repurposed it?" "That money was in my name. I chose to redirect it." His mouth curled like he'd tasted something sour. "Redirected it where? To yourself?" "No," I said calmly. "To a foundation." "The Ellison Foundation." "You used my college money to start a charity?" "It was never yours, it was intended for you, conditional on character." "Oh, so now you're the morality judge." He stood, voice rising. "You think throwing a soda justifies robbing me?" I didn't move. "Brandon, sit down. I earned that money. You don't get to take it because I hurt your feelings." "You didn't hurt my feelings," I said, standing now too, my voice low but steel-edged. "You showed me who you are, that's all." He laughed, one of those incredulous, angry laughs people use when they've already lost control. "You're insane. This is elder abuse in reverse. I could sue you." "You can try. You'll lose." "I don't think I will." He stared at me, eyes narrowed. "You're irrelevant, Grandma. You think this little vanity project makes you important? No one cares." And there it was, that final flick of the blade. I didn't flinch, just looked at him and said what needed to be said. "I don't owe you money. I don't owe you applause. I owe you nothing but the truth." He stormed out, cursing under his breath. The door slammed. The engine roared. Red taillights disappeared down the street without a signal. I exhaled. Later that evening, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat on the porch, letting the cicadas fill the silence he left behind. A flash of memory returned. Joe, my late husband, sitting in this very spot after Brandon's kindergarten graduation. Brandon had thrown a tantrum because we didn't stop for fast food. Joe had smiled, tired but patient. He's headstrong now, but one day he'll have to learn. I wonder what he would have said if he'd seen today. Probably nothing. Joe had a way of letting time handle people. I was learning to do the same. Just after sunset, the doorbell rang again. This time I opened it to find a girl with tightly braided hair and a school-issued windbreaker, maybe 17. She held a manila folder in one hand and a small bag of cookies in the other. "Are you Mrs. Ellison?" she asked. "I am. My name's Trinity. I just got the call. I'm one of the first Ellison Foundation scholarship recipients." She smiled shyly. I just wanted to say thank you. I don't have grandparents, but I help out at a senior center on weekends. I didn't think anyone noticed stuff like that." "They do now," I said, and stepped aside to let her in. She didn't track mud. She asked before sitting, and when I offered tea, she said, "Only if it's not trouble." We sat at the same table Brandon had called me irrelevant at, only now it felt reclaimed. She shared her story. I listened. And for the first time in a very long time I realized it hadn't been about revenge, it was always about realignment. Paige didn't call first. She never did when she was mad. The knock this time was clipped, rapid, a rhythm I recognized from years ago, back when she'd stomp through the house after losing a high school debate round and blame the judges, the questions, the world. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in fast, like the air inside was thinner and she needed to finish what she came to say before she choked on it. "You took his future," she snapped, eyes already glossy. "Do you even hear yourself?" I didn't answer right away. I let her words settle into the space between us like dust. She stood there in her trench coat, hair damp from the drizzle outside, phone still clenched in one fist. I moved toward the kettle and asked quietly, "Would you like tea?" "No," she barked. "I'd like to know what the hell you're doing." I turned, cup in hand. What I should have done years ago. Her jaw twitched. "By what? Publicly humiliating your own grandson?" "He did that himself. I simply reclaimed what was mine." She stared at me like I was speaking a different language. "You really think this is noble? Stripping your own family of opportunities to prove a point? I said carefully, you haven't listened to a word I've said in 10 years. That stopped her for half a breath. But then came the reply I'd braced for. You never approved of how I raised him. I warned you, I said, repeatedly, about his tone, his entitlement, how he treated people who had nothing to offer him. You always saw him as a problem. I saw him clearly. There's a difference. Her voice wavered, still loud, still angry, but the edges were cracking. You've always judged me, Mom. You judged how I fed him, how I dressed him, how I let him express himself. Maybe if you'd spent more time supporting me instead of criticizing me. I supported you? I said evenly. With childcare, with money, with silence when I should have spoken up more. She blinked fast, suddenly quiet. Not in surrender, just recalibrating. Paige had always been that way. Analytical, poised for battle. The silence pressed harder between us until she said, with more softness than before, he's just a kid. He made a mistake. One drink, one insult, one mistake. Fine. But a pattern of cruelty isn't a mistake, Paige. It's a mirror. That one landed. She sat then, slowly, without invitation, at the kitchen table. Same spot Brandon had sat. Same view of the backyard where she'd once practiced twirling with plastic wands in her Sunday dress. I set the cup of tea in front of her anyway. She didn't touch it. I don't know how to fix this, she murmured. You don't have to fix anything, I said. You just have to stop excusing it. She looked up at me, eyes glassy but fierce. And what? Just let the internet drag him? Let strangers decide what kind of person he is? I didn't release anything, I said. But I did write something. I retrieved the laptop from the credenza and opened the tab. A personal blog I'd started years ago, back when I thought aging gracefully meant staying invisible. Now it was titled Rootbound, Notes from the Garden Chair. I turned the screen to face her. The latest post read, Why I replanted my grandson's college fund. You posted this publicly? I told my story, I said, truthfully, with my name attached, and without his. She scrolled silently for a moment, face unreadable. When she reached the bottom, she froze. The comments were already rolling in, some tearful, some grateful, some outraged. A former nurse wrote, You gave voice to something I never knew how to say. A teenage girl had posted, Just sent this to my grandma. Thank you, Paige looked up. This is going to go viral. It already is, I said. She stood without a word, gathered her coat, and walked to the door. But just before stepping out, she said quietly, You're not wrong. But that doesn't mean I know how to be right. The door closed behind her with a whisper instead of a slam. Later that night, the blog passed 50,000 views. I sat on the porch, opened my journal, and wrote one sentence. Sometimes love doesn't divide a family. Silence does. And the comments just kept coming. The knock was soft this time, deliberate, too polite to be sincere. I opened the door and found Brandon standing there in slacks and a pressed button-down, the collar still creased from its recent packaging. His hair was neatly combed, his expression pleasant in the way a politician's smile never quite reaches the eyes. Grandma, he said with false warmth. I was in town. Thought we could talk. My porch light flickered once as if considering whether to stay lit. I stepped aside without inviting him. He took that as permission. He walked in like he owned the air, but his shoulders were tight, stage ready. He hadn't come to apologize. He'd come to negotiate. I motioned toward the couch. He sat but didn't relax, hands folded on his knees like a schoolboy practicing remorse in the mirror. So? He cleared his throat. Listen, I think things got out of hand. Between us. Did they? I asked, sitting across from him. Or did they just get honest? He ignored that, smiled wider. I know you're upset. I get it. I acted like a jerk. But I've been thinking, there's a way we can fix this. Together. I didn't answer. I just reached for my tea and took a slow sip. I talked to someone, he went on. A mentor. They said your blog could really damage things if it keeps spreading, but also, it's kind of a compelling narrative, right? Redemption? Rebuilding bridges? He leaned forward slightly. You could refund the money. I could post a video. We heal publicly. Everyone wins. I stared at him for a moment, then smiled. Just a little. You want me to give the money back? So you can stage a public reconciliation and keep your image clean? His face twitched. I didn't say it like that. You didn't have to. He sat back again, mask slipping just an inch. Why are you being so hostile? I'm trying to find common ground. No, Brandon, I said gently. You're trying to turn my dignity into damage control. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, or fear, or both. You don't understand how things work now, he said, voice cooler. You're not just some retired principal, you're trending. If this story keeps growing, people are going to start digging. You really want that? Is that a threat? He shrugged. Call it advice, from someone who knows how fast the internet turns. I leaned down, opened the drawer of the side table, and clicked the voice recorder on my phone. Brandon froze. What are you doing? Recording this conversation, I said. Just in case. He stood abruptly. You're unbelievable. You're consistent. His jaw clenched, hands balling into fists. You'll regret this. I stood too. Walked toward the door and opened it wide. Maybe, but at least I won't regret who I became. He stormed out without another word, didn't even bother to close the door behind him. The porch light buzzed once more and then went still. I locked the door behind him, slid the bolt, then exhaled. I sat for a moment in the quiet, the recorder still running beside me. I picked it up, saved the file, labeled it Visit Brandon, 6:12 p.m. My fingers trembled just slightly. Then I closed my eyes, and memory arrived unbidden. Brandon at 10, standing on the backyard patio with a plastic toy gavel I'd given him for Christmas. Order in the court, he'd yelled, wagging his finger at the dog. You can't pee on the rose bush. It's against the law. He'd laughed so hard he fell over. I'd laughed too, until I couldn't breathe. That boy could have become anything. But truth without humility just curdles into cruelty. Back then, I'd told him, justice means doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Tonight, he proved he never understood that. Later, as the moon slid across the kitchen tiles, I sat at my desk and began to write the next blog post. I titled it, When an Apology is Just Another Lie. I hadn't even published it yet when my inbox chimed, a message from a verified account. Subject line, interview request. Root-bound blog feature on national segment. I didn't open it right away. I just leaned back, let the weight of the moment settle over my shoulders, and whispered to the dark, let's begin. The interview aired on a Wednesday morning. I didn't watch it live. I took a walk instead, 3 laps around the block with my earbuds out and my phone set to silent. When I returned, my inbox had gone from 30 unread messages to nearly 600. By nightfall, it would break 3,000. The clip went viral before I'd even changed out of my walking shoes. A producer had trimmed it perfectly. Me sitting in my backyard, cardigan over my shoulders, voice clear as I said, respect isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn, even from your elders. It hit a nerve. Boomers reposted it with captions like, finally someone said it. Gen Z stitched it into montages with lo-fi beats and crying emojis. A clip of Brandon tossing his drink, caught on a restaurant security camera and now synced to a TikTok remix, got over 2 million views in 24 hours. I hadn't leaked it. Someone else had. The waitress, maybe. Or a customer with a conscience. Either way, the world had opinions. Some called me brave. Others called me bitter. A trending hashtag read #, root-bound truth #. Another, shorter and meaner, #Granny Gate. By the time Valerie called, voice thick with disbelief, my blog had hit 1 million views. This isn't a story anymore, she said. It's a movement. I didn't know whether to feel proud or nauseous. Sleuths had started digging. Freelance journalists, digital detectives with usernames like @CancelRadar and @ZoomerZoom. They found Brandon's old tweets, screenshots of him calling baristas minimum wage moralists and mocking fellow students for fake anxiety. They uncovered a podcast episode where he joked about gaslighting the boomers before they gaslight us. His sponsors began to fall away like brittle leaves. A lifestyle brand pulled his affiliate link. A startup rescinded his internship offer. I knew because I read the threads, even when I told myself not to. And then, late one evening, came the email, subject, legal notice, Ellison family privacy concern, from Paige Ellison. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. She hadn't written the body herself. That much was clear. It came from a lawyer, dressed in sterile language about reputational harm, undue emotional distress, and public commentary exceeding familial boundaries. The final line struck deepest. We request the immediate removal of any post that may directly or indirectly contribute to defamation of Mr. Brandon Ellison's character. Defamation, as if character were something that couldn't be undone from the inside. I closed the email, made no edits to my blog. Instead, I clicked New Post. This one I titled, When Your Truth Is Their Inconvenience. I didn't include names. I never had. But I did include a quote I'd found in one of Joe's old school journals. He was a history teacher before he became a principal. Every revolution begins with someone daring to speak the truth, loud enough to be called dangerous. That night, under soft lamplight, I scrolled through the new messages flooding in. One stood out. From Margot Leland. Subject: Thank you. I'm 73, taught 6th grade for 39 years. I was starting to believe my story didn't matter anymore, but you reminded me it does. I'm applying to volunteer with a youth literacy program this fall. You inspired me to start again. I reread it twice, then printed it and tacked it beside the dining room calendar. Not for vanity, just so I could see proof that all this noise had roots. Outside, the wind rattled the magnolia leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a car peeled away too fast. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to the dark window glass, "He's going to fight dirtier now." And sure enough, the next morning, an anonymous account posted a heavily edited screen recording, me scolding Brandon from years ago. He must have saved it. Twisted my words until they looked cruel. The caption read, "She's not a victim. She's a manipulator." The comments flooded in, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened a new document and began to write my rebuttal, not with fury, with clarity, because the louder the world got, the more I understood. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to keep showing up. The studio smelled like fresh coffee and foam insulation. Someone had taped a Post-it note over the mic stand that said, "Speak your truth, not your trauma." It made me smile, then frown. Sometimes they're the same thing. Across from me sat Dev Ellis, host of Intergen, the nation's top podcast on bridging age divides. He wore horn-rimmed glasses and a cardigan like a man who wanted to seem safe while asking unsafe questions. "You ready?" he asked, voice soft but professional. "As I'll ever be," I said, adjusting my headset. A red light blinked on, and I began. "I'm not a crusader," I told the world. "I'm a grandmother. I planted a sunflower once with my grandson. Years later, I used his college fund to help other young people grow. That's not revenge. That's realignment." Dev didn't interrupt. He let silence hold space for weight. "I wasn't trying to punish him," I continued. "But I wasn't going to reward cruelty either. We don't do our young people any favors by pretending they're owed grace without reflection." I told the story from the soil up, how the garden taught us to wait, how Brandon once believed worms had birthdays, how he'd laughed as he soaked my blouse in soda like it was a joke he couldn't wait to post. Dev leaned in. "Do you think he'll ever come around?" I looked straight into the mic. "That's his journey. My job was never to be his echo. It was to be his example." The interview ran for 42 minutes. When it ended, the producer high-fived Dev and mouthed, "That was fire." By the time I stepped out into the parking lot, my phone was buzzing like a trapped fly. One text read, "You're trending again, in a good way." Another, "Ma'am, I'm not your student, but I wish I had been." That one made me pause, because they just kept coming. Former students, old PTA volunteers, even a young man from Atlanta who said his grandma helped raise him, and now he was going back to college because your words gave me permission to try again. The next morning, Valerie called. Her voice was electric. "We're doubling the fund, Maggie. Donations are pouring in." I smiled. "From where?" "Everywhere. Ohio, Arizona, Korea even. There's a group of retired school teachers sponsoring a regional branch. They want to start a Respect Initiative chapter in every city they've taught in. By noon, we'd received enough funding to expand into 5 new cities and launch 2 summer mentorship programs. One of them would be at a school where I once worked, East Lincoln Middle. I hadn't stepped foot there in over a decade, but suddenly I was being asked to come back. A message from a former 8th grader appeared in my inbox that night. "Mrs. Ellison, you probably don't remember me, but you told me once that good kids aren't invisible. I never forgot it. You still make us feel seen." I sat with that one a while, let it settle into my chest like warm tea. Then I clicked into the foundation portal and drafted a new program title, the Ellison Fellowship, for students who see beyond themselves. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Brandon's name was never mentioned. It didn't need to be. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about all the ones who showed up, the ones who asked elders how their day was, the ones who listened, the ones who watered what others forgot to tend. I closed the laptop just as the doorbell rang. Not a knock, just a single ring. Software hesitant. I opened the door to find a boy no older than 16 holding a pot of marigolds. "I heard you help people like my aunt," he said. "She raised me. She never asks for anything. I wanted to say thank you." Behind him, a car idled quietly. His aunt waved from the front seat. I waved back. He set the pot in my hands and smiled. "For your garden," he said. "If you still have one." "I do," I told him. "And it's just getting started." It started with a tweet, a blurry screenshot of a text thread, my name visible at the top, my words sliced mid-sentence and stitched back together like a ransom note. One line stood out in bold letters, highlighted by a caption that read, "She's not a hero, she's a bitter old narcissist with a grudge." Within hours, it was everywhere. He'd done it. Brandon. The same hands that once drew me sunflowers had tapped out a digital ambush. He'd taken our last few messages, ones where I tried honestly to set boundaries, and stripped them of their context. I'd written things like, "You've mistaken silence for permission," and "Your choices are yours to live with." He'd cropped out his own replies. The threats, the name-calling. A few outlets picked it up, predictably. Click-hungry headlines bled across my feed. "Grandma gone rogue," the other side of the viral fund feud. "Vindictive or victimized," the truth about Maggie Ellison. One news anchor even called me a cautionary tale for elder overreach. I closed my laptop and sat back hard in the kitchen chair. My palms were damp, my breath came shallow. It wasn't just noise this time, it was character assassination in high definition. The worst part? It worked. A few neighbors didn't wave when I walked past their yards. One woman at the grocery store whispered, "Crazy old lady," under her breath when I reached for a box of tea. The same words he used at the diner, like a curse trying to cling. I hadn't cried yet, but that night, sitting on my porch with my fingers curled around a glass of water that wouldn't stop trembling, I came close. Then I heard the old ringtone, a sound I hadn't assigned to anyone in years. "Eileen Hargrave," my lawyer said when I answered. "We saw the screenshots. You've got a case. Defamation. We'll need timestamps, originals, and a sworn affidavit. I can file by end of week." I exhaled. Not relief, exactly, but steadiness. Like remembering your name after someone tries to erase it. And hour later I got another call. "Still the calm in a storm?" came the voice. It was Marcia Denton, former English teacher, now media consultant. She and I used to carpool to the district office back when we both still believed in dress codes and detention slips. "I've got someone who can help," she said. "Image repair. But honestly, you don't need a spin team. You need a sentence. Maybe 2. I thought for a moment. Then I opened a blank document. The title came first. "The Price of Raising a Narcissist." I wrote it slowly, carefully, not to retaliate, but to clarify. I explained how love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's erosion. How we confuse enabling with protecting. How some mistakes don't belong to children, but to the adults who made excuses for them until they grew claws. I wrote, "I'm not angry at my grandson. I'm angry at every system that told him he could wound others and call it personality. The piece went live the next day in the Charlotte Ledger. It exploded. Donations doubled within 48 hours. The Ellison Foundation trended again, this time alongside tags like #Real Respect and #Break the Cycle. Teachers wrote in, social workers. A foster mother from Detroit who said, "You gave me the courage to say no, to say enough." But the best message came in the form of a handwritten letter. Thick cardstock, careful cursive. It read, "I'm 92. I buried my daughter. My grandson hasn't called in 4 years. I thought maybe I was the problem. Then I read your story. I'm not crazy. I'm just awake now. Thank you." I folded the letter and slipped it between the pages of Joe's old copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He would have liked that. He always believed in hard truths, told softly. That evening I walked through the garden, the marigolds from the boy still blooming near the basil. The air smelled like pine and possibility, but even in the stillness I could feel it. Brandon hadn't finished, not by a long shot, and neither had I. Just then, Valerie texted. One line. "Are you sitting down? You're being invited to speak at the Capitol." I looked up at the sky, soft with dusk, and whispered back the same words I'd once told Brandon during his first tantrum in kindergarten. "Let's try again." The call came just past 11 p.m. A number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut said answer. "Grandma?" His voice was wreckage. Hoarse, watery, stripped of all the armor he used to speak in. For a second I thought maybe I'd dialed backward in time and found the boy who used to cry when cartoons ended too soon. "They kicked me out," he said. "NYU, expelled. They're saying conduct violations, academic dishonesty, all this crap. But it's not what it sounds like." I didn't say anything, just let him keep going. "I lost my internship, my sponsors, my apartment. Mom won't even take my calls anymore." He sucked in a breath. Shaky. "I messed up. I know that now, but I want to start over, please." I closed my eyes. "Where are you staying?" I asked. He told me the name of a cafe 2 towns over, open late, full of college kids pretending they didn't care about finals. "I'll meet you there tomorrow, noon," I said. "Thank you," he whispered. The line went quiet. I didn't sleep, not from worry, from caution. Some calls sound like healing, others are just rehearsals. He was already there when I arrived, hoodie pulled low, eyes red, a black coffee steaming in front of him. The table was tucked near the window, far from the others. "Hey," he said, trying a smile that didn't quite form. "Thanks for coming." I sat across from him. No hug, no touch, just observation. "I want to do better," he said, words tumbling. "I've been going to therapy. Well, I started. I watched your podcast, read the blogs. I get it now." "I do." I sipped my tea. "Do you?" He nodded fast. Too fast. "Yes, I was awful. I didn't respect you. I was selfish. Entitled, I know that now." "Why now?" I asked. He blinked. "Because I lost everything." There it was. Not because I hurt you. Not because I'm ashamed. Because I lost everything. Still, I waited. Gave him space to dig deeper. "Look," he said, voice thinning. "We could do a video together. Something real. Raw. Redemption arc, you know? People love those. You're a public figure now. So am I, kind of. We could—" I raised a hand. "Stop." His mouth stayed open for a second before closing. "I came here to see if you meant it," I said quietly. "If you'd changed, or if you'd just lost." He leaned back, defensive now. "What's the difference?" "Growth isn't what you say when you're cornered. It's what you do when no one's watching." The smile dropped. "You always do this," he snapped. "Twist things. Manipulate. You want me to fail. You get off on this." There it was, the mask cracking, the venom underneath. I stood. "You're not at rock bottom," I said. "Not yet. But you'll know when you're there, because no one's left to lie to but yourself." He looked away. "So that's it? You're done?" I was done. The moment I realized I was the only one in this family choosing truth over performance, I left the coffee untouched and walked out. That afternoon, Valerie and I stood in the new wing of the library at East Lincoln Middle. A brass plaque gleamed above a new door. The Ellison Center for Intergenerational Leadership. She held a press release in one hand and grinned. "Want to read it?" "Not yet," I said. "Read it for me." She did. A smooth voice reciting sentences that sounded like legacy, not revenge, not reputation, purpose, increased scholarships, 10 cities, a rural outreach grant, national curriculum pilot, and somewhere in the middle, a new partnership with the Department of Education to amplify the Respect Initiative across underfunded school districts. I looked through the glass at a group of kids sitting in a circle, middle schoolers. One had their arm around an elderly man in a Vietnam vet cap. They were laughing, sharing stories, listening. "They don't know what you gave up," Valerie said softly. "They don't have to." Outside, the sun broke through after a week of clouds. I stood in the warmth for a moment longer than I needed to, because in my pocket, my phone buzzed. A new message. From Brandon. Just one word, "Please." But I didn't open it. Instead, I walked back inside. There were interviews to prepare for, chapters to plan, and students still learning how to grow. The courthouse was older than it looked on the news, limestone stained by decades of southern rain, columns chipping at the base, like even justice needed a touch-up now and then. Camera crews flanked the steps by 8 a.m., tripods planted like bayonets. I arrived quietly, escorted by Eileen and a second lawyer she'd brought in from Raleigh. Valerie had offered to come too, but I told her to stay focused on the kids. I didn't need support. I needed clarity. The hearing was set for 9:30. Civil court, small chamber, no jury. Brandon's petition claimed reputational harm, emotional distress, and undue influence over public opinion. What he meant was, I didn't like losing the spotlight. He walked in just after us, dressed in another too-new suit, jaw set like someone auditioning for victimhood. Paige was beside him, arms folded, gaze lowered. She didn't look at me. I didn't try to meet her eyes. The judge was a woman in her 60s. Gray bun, tortoiseshell glasses, not one for pageantry. She flipped through the file with quick, decisive fingers. "Mr. Ellison," she began, "you've filed a claim for defamation and undue distress. Please present your opening statement." Brandon stood. His voice trembled just enough to look practiced. "Your Honor, I was unfairly targeted by a viral narrative created by my grandmother. She portrayed me in a misleading light and used personal family matters to boost her public profile. I've lost educational and professional opportunities because of this campaign." He sat, satisfied. Eileen rose, calm, practiced. "Your Honor, we have provided the court with the original text messages in full, unedited, along with digital timestamps, correspondence logs, and 3 character witnesses who can speak to Mrs. Ellison's conduct, integrity, and public transparency." The judge held up the documents. "I've reviewed them. I also watched the interview, the blog entries, and the footage from the diner, which your client's team introduced as evidence." Brandon blinked. This wasn't the stage he'd counted on. "Mr. Ellison," the judge said, voice sharpening, "did you or did you not omit portions of messages in the screenshots your team provided to media outlets?" He hesitated. "I may have paraphrased for clarity." "For clarity?" Eileen interjected. "Your Honor, we have digital proof he edited and distributed false screenshots in an attempt to manipulate public perception." The judge turned back to Brandon. "Son, this isn't TikTok. This is a courtroom. We don't do paraphrasing here. We do truth." Brandon sank slightly in his seat. "Furthermore," she continued, "you filed a civil suit claiming emotional distress, while simultaneously marketing merchandise that mocks your grandmother's blog. You want to explain that?" He fumbled. That was a branding strategy." The courtroom exhaled in one slow, collective blink. "I've seen enough," the judge said, stacking the papers. "This case is dismissed." She looked directly at him. "Mr. Ellison, your time would be better spent reflecting than litigating. Wasting this court's resources to settle a bruised ego isn't just unwise, it's dishonorable. You may leave." Paige reached for his arm. He yanked it away, stormed out. I didn't follow. Outside, the press surged forward. I stepped to the microphones, briefly. "I have no gloating to offer," I said simply. "Just this. Standing for dignity costs something, but so does silence, and I choose to pay for the truth. Then I stepped away. No questions, no drama. By dusk, news outlets were already printing headlines. Judge tosses case, calls Gran. Dishonorable. Ellison family saga ends in courtroom victory. Respect isn't trendy, it's timeless. Valerie texted a photo later, the front lobby of a school in Tulsa. A Respect Initiative banner hung across the hallway. Below it, a dozen kids holding thank you signs. And just before I went to bed, a final email came through. Subject: Invitation to speak, White House Senior Dignity Summit. I stared at it. Let the words sit on the screen like a sunrise waiting to be acknowledged. Because this wasn't about vindication anymore. It was about where the truth could go next. And I was just getting started. The knock came just after dusk. No demand, no rhythm. Just 3 tentative taps that sounded more like questions than statements. I opened the door and found Paige on the porch, shoulders hunched in a navy cardigan I hadn't seen since the year her father died. Her eyes were swollen, not from sleep, but from the kind of crying you try to do quietly until it's not quiet anymore. "I don't want to fight," she said. "Then come in," I replied. She stepped over the threshold like she was walking into a confession booth. We moved to the kitchen without a word. The tea was already steeped. She sat. I poured. "I read the transcript," she said, voice tight. "From court. I watched it too. Every second I didn't speak. Some truths are like bruises. You wait to see where the pain settles." She stared down at the rim of her cup. "I thought I was protecting him. When he was little. After Joel left. After Dad passed. I kept telling myself love meant covering for him, so he wouldn't feel abandoned. I waited. Let the silence work like soil does, turning the raw into something usable. I gave him too many exits," she continued. "Excused every tantrum, blamed every teacher, coddled every failure." She looked up at me then, eyes wide with something fragile. "And you warned me. You warned me for years." I still didn't speak. "But I couldn't hear it," she said. "Because if you were right, then I had failed. And I couldn't face that." Her voice broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to crack the air between us. "I'm so tired, Mom, of defending him, of defending me." I reached across the table, not to fix, but to anchor. Just my hand resting gently on hers. "I'm not asking you to excuse it," she said, "or to forget. But I wanted you to know. I see it now. All of it." We sat there for a long time. 2 women separated by 30 years and 1,000 assumptions. Finally, I said, "You weren't wrong for loving him. You were wrong for thinking love had to mean surrender?" She let that sit, then nodded. "I donated," she said, "anonymously, to the foundation. I don't want my name on anything. I just needed to do something that wasn't about shame." I looked at her then. Really looked. Saw the girl who used to bring me breakfast in bed every Mother's Day. The teenager who once called me in tears because her prom dress zipper broke. The woman who got so good at surviving, she forgot how to be seen. "This doesn't fix everything," I said gently. "But it's a start." She nodded, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. "I know." Outside, the wind carried the smell of fresh mulch from the garden beds. "I should go," she said, standing. I walked her to the door. When she reached the porch steps, she turned. "For what it's worth, I think Brandon's starting to feel it now. The quiet, the echo." I nodded. "It takes longer to notice when the world's always clapping for you." She smiled faintly. "I miss him. Not the man. The boy who used to chase fireflies." "So do I," I said. "But I don't miss losing myself to keep him whole." She nodded again. No hug, just a shared, unspoken truth between mothers. Then she walked to her car and drove off. Later I opened the donation log. Anonymous. $5,000. A message in the notes. For the kids still willing to learn. And the mothers learning late. I closed the laptop, poured another cup of tea, and whispered toward the empty hallway. "Come what may, we're learning now." The marble glistened under a pale afternoon sun, the kind that lent an almost cinematic hue to everything it touched. Maggie adjusted the cuff of her navy jacket, the one Valerie insisted she wear because it photographed well, and stepped onto the stone platform just behind the velvet ropes. To her right, the American flag billowed in a soft breeze that smelled faintly of boxwood and distant exhaust. Behind her, the press murmured in low tones, their cameras already pointed, lenses focused not on a celebrity or a politician, but on her. Not just a grandmother anymore, not just a widow with strong opinions and a shaky hand that still made perfect tea. Today, Margaret Ellison was being honored by the National Council on Generational Equity for transformative advocacy in intergenerational leadership. The name was a mouthful. The moment, heavier than it sounded. A young staffer in a gray blazer approached with a small discreet microphone. "They're ready for you, ma'am." Maggie nodded, took a measured breath, and stepped up to the podium as the moderator's voice faded into applause behind her. She adjusted the mic with careful fingers. On her wrist, just below the cuff of that jacket, her late husband Joe's old watch sat quietly, ticking in metronome rhythm. The face was cracked, but the hands still moved, steady, unfazed by the noise. Maggie looked out at the crowd. Faces of all ages, rows of chairs filled with students, educators, nonprofit leaders, and more than a few congressional aides trying not to check their phones. It was the most formal audience she'd stood before since her retirement ceremony. But this wasn't a goodbye. This was something else. "I stand here today," she began, her voice clear, though softer than the booming confidence of televised leaders, "because I once mistook silence for dignity." The crowd quieted further. Even the breeze paused. "I believed for years that to age gracefully meant to shrink, to observe, to yield, to nod quietly in rooms where your heart was screaming. I don't believe that anymore. Because I learned the hard way. Silence doesn't preserve respect. It enables erosion." Her eyes found the front row, where Valerie sat between two high schoolers from Tulsa, both wearing pins that read, "Ellison Scholar." One of them wiped his cheek discreetly. The other sat upright, clutching a notepad like scripture. "I redirected a college fund, that's what the headline said, and it's true, I did. But that's not the story. The story is what we allow to grow in the soil of what we sacrifice. I didn't destroy a future, I chose to invest in hundreds." There was no cheering, just stillness, the kind that lets a person's words burrow deep. "I don't stand here today because I was brave. I stand here because I got tired. Tired of mistaking rudeness for youth. Tired of watching respect get treated like a relic. Tired of watching young people ask for permission to care instead of being taught that kindness is power." Maggie paused, her breath catching briefly. Her fingers brushed the edge of the podium where Joe's hand might have rested had he been here. "We are not what we give. We are what we're willing to withhold when giving would cost us our principles." She looked up, voice a little firmer now, "And legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's who we empower while we're still here." Applause rose slowly, then crescendoed. A sea of hands clapped, not out of politeness but solidarity. After the speech, she stood beside the foundation's new national banner as flashes clicked, microphones pointed, and a dozen voices tried to shout her name at once. But she didn't answer questions. She simply posed with the students, shook hands with teachers, and signed a Respect Initiative handbook for a senator's aide who whispered, "My grandmother would have loved you." Across the country, her words were already trending, under hashtags like #LegacyIsListening and #EllisonEffect. Brandon watched the entire event from his phone screen in a quiet apartment in Baltimore where the lights flickered from overdue maintenance and the mail piled unanswered by the door. He didn't post, he didn't text, he simply watched, and for once, said nothing at all. That night, Maggie returned to her hotel, toes aching and shoulders sore. She slipped off the jacket, loosened the watch strap, and poured herself a glass of water. Then she sat on the bed, opened her notebook, and began outlining her next speech for a high school in Ohio that had just joined the foundation. As she turned the page, the light from the bedside lamp caught the watch face. The second hand ticked gently on, still counting, still moving forward. So was she. It was tucked between two ordinary manila folders on her desk, one of hundreds of new applications submitted to the Ellison Foundation's Rural Grant Initiative. The name on the top line was Benji Graves, rural Maryland address, GPA barely passable, personal statement riddled with buzzwords. But Maggie knew that voice. No matter how careful he thought he'd been, she recognized the cadence of ego disguised as humility. The paragraphs dripped with an artificial modesty, carefully constructed, a script written not from remorse, but strategy. She read every word anyway. In the essay, he described a tumultuous past, vaguely alluding to family conflict, framed not as consequence, but misfortune. He spoke of rising from reputational setbacks and desiring to invest in underserved communities to atone for youthful arrogance, but there was no ownership, no honesty, just a hollow performance dressed in borrowed regret. When she reached the end, she closed the folder gently and placed it on the far edge of her desk. For a while, she just sat there, watching the late autumn wind rattle the garden's thinning branches outside her window. Somewhere out there, the boy who used to blow dandelion wishes into the sky still existed. But she wasn't in the business of chasing ghosts anymore. Instead, she reached for her stationery drawer, took out the heavy cream envelope she used for handwritten thank you notes, and in her neat looping hand she wrote, "Dear applicant, thank you for your submission to the Ellison Foundation's 2026 Rural Renewal Scholarship. After careful review, your application has been denied. This decision was not based on your GPA, nor your income bracket, nor your carefully curated self-portrayal. It was based on a missing prerequisite, character. At the Ellison Foundation, we don't just invest in stories, we invest in integrity. You've requested a second chance. I'm returning the favor with a reminder. Second chances are earned, not engineered. Attached, you'll find a single penny, not for luck, not for insult, but as a symbol. When you can look in the mirror and say your change was worth more than that, you'll know you're ready to begin again. Sincerely, Margaret Ellison, Executive Director, Ellison Foundation for Intergenerational Leadership." She taped the coin gently to the bottom of the letter. A tarnished 2011 penny, the year Brandon graduated elementary school, the year he gave her a homemade World's Best Grandma ribbon with glue still tacky on the back. She remembered how proud he'd been, how easy it had been back then to believe in futures that hadn't yet been tested. The envelope sealed with a soft sigh of paper and purpose. She didn't expect gratitude, she barely expected acknowledgement, but she did want it to land. She wanted him to sit with the weight of it, no louder than a whisper, no sharper than truth. 3 days later, across the cracked linoleum floor of a Baltimore apartment complex, Brandon tore open the envelope like it owed him something. His eyes scanned the letter, then dropped to the coin, which glinted dully in the harsh kitchen light. He didn't scream, didn't cry, just sat on the edge of the sink, letter crumpling in his hand, the penny still taped to its corner like a dare he wasn't ready to accept. Back in Maggie's office, Valerie entered quietly with a new file. "This one came in late," she said. "A sophomore in Missouri, single-parent household, works nights at a gas station, volunteers weekends at a nursing home. And he wrote his essay by hand." Maggie flipped through the file. The writing was messy but sincere. Every sentence rang with clarity, no victimhood, no veneers. She smiled. "Let's award it." "In Brandon's name?" Valerie asked gently. Maggie nodded. "Why not? May as well make his name worth something." Valerie grinned. "I'll file it now." As she left, Maggie turned to the window once more. The wind had died down. The marigolds were still holding on, even as the season shifted. She poured herself a cup of tea. Just one. No second for company. No second for ghosts. The cup warmed her palms as she whispered into the stillness. "Change doesn't wait for permission. And I don't wait for apologies." Then she returned to the stack of applications. And chose again. The seminar room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and ambition. Rows of folding chairs faced a simple lectern, but Maggie chose to stand in front of it, hands relaxed at her sides. No speech notes, no teleprompter, just a quiet room full of sharp eyes and sharpened pencils, teenagers and 20-somethings with lives already heavier than their years suggested. It was the third stop on the Respect Initiative's youth leadership tour. Tulsa, then Atlanta, now here, Columbus, Ohio, and this one felt different. Maybe it was the overcast sky or the way the students sat forward, leaning into her words like they were thirsty for something more than just another motivational soundbite. She'd been speaking for 15 minutes. Nothing rehearsed, just stories of how gardens taught her more than faculty meetings ever did, of how one lie told often enough doesn't become truth, it becomes inheritance. The room stayed still, like they understood what wasn't being said aloud. Then a hand rose, not urgently but slowly. A boy in the back row, dark curls, windbreaker zipped too high, scholarship badge on his lanyard. Maggie nodded toward him. He stood, unsure, eyes flicking to the floor before settling on her. What if the people who hurt you are the ones who raised you? He asked, voice steady but raw. How do you forgive someone who never asked to be forgiven? The room didn't move, not a whisper, just the kind of stillness that asks for truth. Maggie didn't answer right away. She studied his face, saw the lines worry had etched early, the kind that didn't come from grades or growing pains, but from disappointment worn like a second skin. She took a step closer. "What's your name?" she asked. "Julian," he replied. She nodded. "Julian," she said gently. "Some people carry knives in their words because they were handed nothing gentler. And some of us spend years pressing those cuts into ourselves, thinking it makes us strong. But the truth is, it only makes us bleed quietly." He blinked, startled not by the words but by their accuracy. "You don't owe forgiveness to someone who hasn't stopped the harm," she continued. "You owe healing to yourself, and sometimes the only thing you can do for a broken family is to stop the cycle with you." Julian sat down slowly. No applause. Just silence, gratitude, a kind of quiet reckoning that would stay with him far longer than the hour. Later, after the seminar ended and most of the students had gathered near the snack table, Maggie lingered by the window. The school overlooked a small green courtyard, ringed by benches and a single tree already turning to rust red with fall. A coordinator approached. "You're still good to meet with the Ellison Scholars Group afterward?" She smiled. "Of course." But before they could leave, Julian returned. Hands in his pockets now, braver than before. "I got the grant last spring," he said quietly. "My foster mom found the application online, said it sounded like it was written by someone who sees people like us." Maggie's chest tightened. "I'm glad she did." He hesitated, then added, "I don't think I'll ever get an apology from the ones who should have known better. But I think maybe that's not the point anymore." Maggie reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small card from the foundation. "Then let's focus on what's next." He nodded, took it, walked back toward the others. That night, in her hotel room, she sat by the window with her journal open and her reading glasses resting low on her nose. The lamplight cast a golden pool over the page. She wrote, "You don't have to save them all. Just the ones who still believe listening is worth more than shouting, the ones who don't want to win, just to understand, and maybe, someday, to be understood." She capped the pen, closed the journal, sat back. For the first time in what felt like years, Maggie laughed. Not the brittle laugh of disbelief, not the hollow echo of exhaustion, but a full, open sound, the kind that rose from the chest and softened the air around it. Free. She poured herself a final cup of tea, no second mug, no waiting for someone who never arrived. Then she turned off the light and let the quiet wrap around her like a promise. Some things can't be fixed, but they can be regrown, and the garden was still hers.